I sat in my chair by the fireplace holding a cold cup of tea. It was getting dusk outside the window of my house in Wellington. I didn't want to turn on the light. It was easier to think about what had happened 3 days ago. Patrick's words were still ringing in my ears like an annoying fly that couldn't be swatted away. My only son had called me a nobody. Just like that, in between, like it was about the weather. Rachel stood beside him and nodded, supporting every word he said. They talked about my future as if I couldn't make my own decisions anymore. At 72, they thought I was a burden that needed to be put in the right place. The house seemed too big in these evening hours. I'd built it 40 years ago, when Patrick was only 5. Back then, these rooms were filled with children's laughter, the sounds of toys, and the voice of my late wife Elizabeth. She died 10 years ago. I've lived here alone ever since. But I'd never felt alone until Patrick brought Rachel into the house. That was 5 years ago. Patrick was working as a purchasing manager for a large company and felt quite successful. He was 37, and I thought he was going to remain a bachelor. But then she came along. Rachel Thompson was a beautician who worked in a fashion salon and could look flawless under any circumstances. She was 34 and clearly looking for stability. Patrick fit her criteria for an ideal husband, and as a high-end property owner, I made him an even more attractive candidate. My experience as a bailiff had taught me how to read people. I immediately realized that Rachel was not only evaluating my son, but also our family assets. In her gaze when she first crossed the threshold of this house, I saw an expression I knew well from my work. It's the way one looks at the assets they plan to receive. At first, I tried to be happy about their relationship. Elizabeth had always dreamed of a daughter-in-law and grandchildren. She envisioned babysitting the little ones in the same house, passing down family traditions and telling them stories of the past. But Rachel made it clear right away that children were not part of her plans. She talked about her career, about wanting to open her own salon, about traveling and entertaining. Motherhood seemed to her a relic of the past, something that could hinder her ambitions. The first months after the wedding were relatively quiet. The young couple rented an apartment downtown, and we saw each other on weekends. Rachel was polite, but always kept her distance. She never called me father, only by my first name. There was a strain in her voice as if she struggled with every word. I realized that I played a role in her plans, but it was clearly temporary. Gradually, their visits became more and more formal. Patrick came alone or with his wife, but the conversations invariably centered on one topic: my age and the need to think about the future. They talked about it carefully, in streamlined phrases, but the meaning was clear. The house is too big for one person. At my age, it's dangerous to live alone. Modern nursing homes offer excellent facilities and round-the-clock care. Behind the polite words about care, there were other motives. Rachel wanted this house. She worked methodically to get it. Her approach was professional, almost scientific. First, she studied the layout, assessed the condition of the utilities, asked about the title deeds. Then she cautiously inquired about my finances, my pension and savings. All this was presented under the guise of concern for my well-being. Patrick succumbed to her influence, as he had always succumbed to the influence of strong women. First, it was his mother, who made all the important decisions for him until she died. Now it was his wife. My son has always been a man of weak character, easily influenced by others. As a child, he could not stand up for himself at school, allowed classmates to cheat on homework and take his pocket money. In his youth, he floundered between different hobbies, never really finding himself. First, he wanted to become a musician, then he became interested in programming, then he thought about economic education. He got a job as a purchasing manager by chance, through acquaintances, and held on to it more by inertia than by vocation. He never showed much interest in his duties, performed them mechanically, without enthusiasm. When Rachel spoke of the changes in the house, I could see her eyes light up. She already envisioned herself as a hostess, welcoming guests into the renovated rooms. My presence clearly didn't fit into that picture. I was an obstacle to her dream, and she wasn't going to put up with that obstacle for long. 3 months ago, their hints became more explicit. Rachel started talking about how wonderful it would be to renovate the house, update the interior, maybe knock down some walls to create an open space. She described her plans in as much detail as if she already considered herself the owner of the place. She talked about a new kitchen with an island in the middle, a walk-in closet in the master bedroom, how my office could be converted into a guest room. Patrick was silent during these monologues, only occasionally chiming in. Sometimes I caught his glance and saw something akin to an apology, but he never openly contradicted his wife. He had learned to avoid conflict, preferring acquiescence to open confrontation. This character trait had been evident in his childhood and had only grown stronger over the years. Over the past few months, I began to notice a change in Rachel's behavior. She no longer hid her impatience. When I talked about my plans for the future, she would roll her eyes or yawn defiantly. When I mentioned the need to fix something in the house, she would immediately start talking about how it would be easier to redo everything. She stopped being interested in my health or my mood. Instead, she constantly emphasized my weaknesses. If I forgot something, she immediately commented on it as a sign of senile sclerosis. If I walked slowly up the stairs, she sighed and talked about how dangerous it was to live in a two-story house at my age. Patrick didn't mind these remarks. What's more, he began to encourage them. Reluctantly at first, but gradually more and more confidently. He talked about how he was worried about my safety, how he couldn't work quietly knowing that I was alone in this big house. The concern in his voice sounded fake, but he tried to make it sound sincere. And 3 days ago, their patience ran out completely. They arrived on Sunday around 6 o'clock in the evening, exactly as usual. I'd been cooking dinner since 3 o'clock in the afternoon, even though I knew Rachel would find something to pick on. She always did. The meat overcooked, the vegetables undercooked, the bread not the kind she preferred. But I kept cooking for them because those were the only times my son came into his parents' home, even if only formally. Rachel entered first without even saying hello. She looked around the living room with her usual appraising gaze, as if searching for changes or imperfections. She was wearing a new dress, obviously expensive, and high-heeled shoes that clattered loudly on the parquet. Patrick followed her carrying the bottle of wine they always brought and always took back if it went unopened. "Hi, Daddy," he said, giving me a languid hug with no warmth. There was a sense of obligation, not desire, in his embrace. It felt like a handshake with someone I didn't know very well. "How are you doing? How's your health?" "I'm fine," I replied, leading them into the kitchen. "Dinner's almost ready. Made your favorite potato casserole." It really was Patrick's favorite dish once upon a time. As a kid, he could eat an entire mold at a time, and Elizabeth had joked about having to cook potatoes in sacks. But now Rachel snorted with disdain. "Robert, you know Patrick hasn't eaten potatoes in years. We've switched to a proper diet. Carbohydrates after 6 in the evening are unhealthy." I didn't know about this restriction. Patrick hadn't mentioned it during past visits when he ate my potato casserole with gusto. Moreover, until a month ago, he had asked for this very dish. But he didn't object. Instead, he took out of the refrigerator salad, which I prepared just in case, anticipating the next whims of my daughter-in-law. "We can make do with salad and meat," I suggested conciliatingly. "Meat is greasy too," Rachel continued, sitting down at the table and pulling hand sanitizer out of her purse. She always carried it with her, like my house was a breeding ground for infections. "Patrick watches his cholesterol. At his age, it's important." Patrick was 37 years old. At that age, men don't usually worry about cholesterol unless they have serious health problems. But my son nodded obediently, agreeing with my wife. He always agreed with her, even when she contradicted his own words from a few minutes ago. We ate in a heavy silence. Rachel picked at her salad with her fork, showing her displeasure with the quality of the food. She took a leaf at a time, chewed for a long time, wrinkled her nose. Patrick chewed slowly, looking down at his plate as if there was something extremely interesting written there. I tried to strike up a conversation about the weather, the news, anything, but got one-word answers. "Nice weather today," I said. "Uh-huh," Patrick echoed. "They were talking about pension increases on the news." "Yeah," came the one-word answer again. "The Johnsons' neighbors are selling the house, moving in with their daughter in Oakland." This time Rachel looked up. Smart people. At their age, it's right to be close to the kids. I took the hint, but didn't react to it. The atmosphere was getting more tense by the minute. After dinner, we moved into the living room as we always did during their visits. Rachel settled down on the couch, immediately pulled out her phone, and started browsing something on social media. The bright screen lit up her face, and I could see her flipping through the feed, occasionally putting up likes. Patrick sat down in the chair across from me and coughed. It was a sound I knew well. It was the way he'd coughed when he was a kid, when he was about to apologize for a broken vase or a bad grade in school. The same nervous coughing, the same attempts to pull himself together before an unpleasant conversation. "Dad, we wanted to talk to you about an important matter," he began, avoiding my gaze. Instead, he looked at the coffee table, at the coffee cups, at anything but me. "We're worried about you." "For me?" I interjected, even though I already guessed where the conversation was headed. This dialogue had been brewing for months, and I could feel it coming. "You live alone in this big house," Patrick continued with a carefully rehearsed phrase. I could see him choosing his words, trying to pronounce them just right so as not to offend, but to get the point across. "You're 72 years old. What if something happens to you? If you fall or feel sick, who's going to help you?" Rachel looked up from the phone as if that was the signal for her to enter the conversation. "The neighbors have enough problems of their own. They're not going to check on you every day to see how you're feeling, and you'll only be able to call an ambulance if you can get to a phone in time." Her voice sounded calm and reasonable, but you could hear the impatience in it. She was tired of this diplomatic talk and wanted to get to the point. I could see her looking at Patrick, encouraging him to be more decisive with her gaze. "We found a great place," my son said, finally deciding to get to the main point. "The Sun Valley Nursing Home in the suburbs. It has very nice facilities, 24-hour medical staff, and a variety of activities for seniors. We went there last week to look around. You'll like it there." They went to look at the nursing home without letting me know, made decisions about my life without my input, discussed my future like a commodity that needs to be properly placed in a warehouse, chose a place for me to live, as if I were an incapacitated old man, incapable of making my own decisions. "I'm not moving anywhere," I said firmly, looking my son straight in the eye. "This house was built by myself. This is where my life with your mother took place. This is where you grew up. This is where your childhood memories are. I'm not leaving this place." Rachel rolled her eyes with an expression as if I'd said something incredibly stupid. "Robert, be realistic. You'll be 73 soon. How much longer will you be able to keep up with the household chores? What if you get sick? What if you forget to turn off the gas or the lights? What if you fall in the bathtub and break your leg?" "I'm doing just fine," I replied calmly. "I have a sharp mind and good health. I lead an active lifestyle, tend to my garden, read, and socialize with friends. I don't need babysitting." "Dad, you've become forgetful," Patrick interjected, with a sympathy in his voice that sounded fake. "Last week you called me 3 times in a row to tell me the same story. And a month ago, you left the front door open all night. It was an outright lie." "I never left the door open or repeated the same stories. I had an excellent memory and remembered all my conversations with my son well." But Patrick said it with such conviction, as if he really believed what he was saying. Rachel had taught him to twist the facts in his favor, to present lies as caring. "It didn't happen," I said loud and clear. "It did," Patrick insisted, and there was a hardness in his voice. "You just don't remember. That's normal at your age, but that's why you need professional help." Rachel got up from the couch and walked over to the window, looking out at the garden I'd been growing for decades. "Besides, this house is too expensive to maintain. Utility bills, repairs, property taxes. Why spend money on something you can't afford? In a nursing home, everything is included in the cost of living. It's cost effective." She talked about my money like she already owned it, about my house as if I was a temporary resident who had stayed too long in someone else's territory. There wasn't an ounce of sympathy or understanding in her voice, only the practical logic of someone planning to get rid of an unwanted load. "My finances are perfectly fine," I said dryly. "The pension is enough for all my expenses, plus I have savings I've been saving all my life." "Savings will run out quickly if you need serious treatment," Rachel parried, not turning away from the window. "And in a nursing home, medical care is included in the cost. It's cost-effective in the long run." Patrick nodded, agreeing with his wife. "She's right, Dad. We're not only thinking about your safety, but also financial feasibility. By selling the house, you'll be able to provide for a decent old age without too many worries." By selling the house, there it was, finally out in the open. They wanted me to sell the house and use the proceeds to pay for a nursing home. And then when I died, they'd get nothing except maybe a small amount of money in a bank account. That's a very convenient plan. Get rid of a burdensome relative and at the same time deny them the opportunity to leave someone a significant inheritance. And what happens to the proceeds after I die? I asked bluntly, not wanting to play diplomacy anymore. Rachel turned from the window and I saw a flash of irritation in her eyes at such a direct question. It's a painful subject, but in a nursing home, people usually don't live very long. Money is spent on care and treatment. It's a natural aging process. The natural process. That's what she called my death, an event that would free them from having to pretend to be caring relatives. I looked at Patrick, hoping to see at least a shadow of protest at such cynicism, but he remained silent, staring at the floor as if this conversation didn't concern him. I'm not going to the nursing home, I repeated firmly, and I'm not selling the house. It's my house, built with my hands, and I'm going to live here as long as I want. Rachel turned sharply toward me, and the mask of politeness finally fell off her face. Stop being stubborn like an old donkey. You're just selfishly clinging to the past. We offer you a reasonable solution, and you're acting like a capricious child. Rachel, Patrick tried to stop her in a weak voice, but she waved her hand, brushing aside his objections. No, let him hear the truth. Robert, you are a burden to your family. We can't plan for the future, knowing that at any moment you may need help. We can't travel. We can't relax because we're constantly worried about you. The air in the living room became thick with tension after Rachel's words. She stood in the middle of the room, her face burning with a fury she no longer tried to hide behind a mask of politeness. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her makeup beginning to blur with emotion. Patrick sat in his chair, hands clenched into fists, but still silent as he always was in moments of conflict. He had never been good at dealing with open confrontation and preferred others to solve problems for him, to take the hit and responsibility. We're wasting time and nerves on you, Rachel continued, waving her arms and pacing back and forth across the room like an enraged cat in an overly cramped cage. Every weekend we're supposed to come down here, check on you guys, see how you're doing, see if you're doing okay. Instead of vacationing or seeing friends, planning romantic trips, we're forced to play happy family. I remained silent, looking intently at the woman who 5 years ago shook my hand timidly at our first meeting and told me in a voice trembling with excitement how excited she was to be a part of our close-knit family. Then she called this house cozy and incredibly beautiful, sincerely admired the garden, which I have laid out with my own hands over the years. With genuine interest, asked about the family photos on the mantle, asked to tell about the traditions and customs of our family. Now there is not even the slightest trace left of that modest and polite girl who tried so hard to make a good impression. We can't set aside money for a proper vacation because we know very well that at any moment you may need expensive treatment, she was saying, and there was genuine resentment and indignation in her voice, as if I was really purposely preventing them from living a full and happy life. We can't plan to buy our own house. We can't take out a mortgage because we have no confidence in the future. It was interesting and even amusing to listen to these fiery accusations. They rented a spacious apartment in the heart of the city, regularly spent a lot of money on expensive brand-name clothes, went on vacation at least twice a year, and not in some cheap places and in prestigious resorts. Rachel regularly updated her closet, made expensive cosmetic procedures in elite salons, visited spa centers. But it turns out I was solely to blame for all their supposed financial difficulties because I had the audacity to exist and potentially get sick. Patrick finally looked up and tried to take control of the situation. Rachel, please calm down. Let's talk calmly, rationally, without too much emotion. Calmly, she turned to him with a contemptuous grin that distorted her normally attractive face. We've been talking calmly for 5 whole years, and what's the result? Absolutely none. He sits stubbornly in this huge house and absolutely refuses to hear the voice of reason. She walked over to the sofa and sat down abruptly, defiantly crossing her arms over her chest in a defensive posture. Her breathing was noticeably rapid, her eyes glistening with rage and frustration accumulated over the years. At such moments, she reminded me strikingly of the people I used to meet in my workplace during debtors' foreclosures. The same ruthless cruelty, the same willingness to ruthlessly trample on other people's feelings to achieve her own ends, the same predatory, greedy expression on her face. Look, Dad. Patrick tried to take the initiative, rising slowly from his chair and approaching me cautiously. It's not like we're your enemies. We genuinely want you to be well, comfortable, and safe. But you absolutely must understand our position too. What position exactly? I asked, looking intently straight into his eyes. You see, we're still young people. We have serious plans for the future, big dreams, ambitions. He nervously avoided a direct look, as he always did when he spoke untruths or tried to hide his true motives. And these constant worries about you are greatly hindering us from realizing our plans. It creates chronic stress in our daily lives. Constant worries. What a striking formulation. They came to see me strictly once a week for exactly 2 hours, and it was majestically called constant worries. They never offered any real help around the house, never inquired about my daily chores or problems, never asked if I needed to buy something at the store or fix things around the house. Their proverbial concern consisted solely in their persistent attempts to persuade me to leave my own home and thus clear the way for them to inherit unhindered. I see, I said slowly and thoughtfully. So I'm seriously interfering with your ability to live your life to the fullest. Well, in a way, yes. Patrick finally said something that had been on his tongue for a long time, but which he had been hesitant to say openly and directly. It's not that you're interfering with us on purpose and with malice aforethought, but the very fact of your existence makes our lives much more difficult and restrictive. Rachel nodded approvingly, having finally heard those long-awaited words. Exactly. You're finally speaking honestly and openly. Yes, Robert, you are definitely preventing us from having a normal life. We can't quietly do the things we want to do, make the plans we really like, because you are constantly hanging a heavy dead weight around our necks. I got up from my comfortable chair and slowly walked to the wide window, beyond which the vast garden I had patiently planted and lovingly cultivated over many decades stretched in the evening twilight. Every tree, every carefully chosen shrub, every colorful flower bed had been planted by my own hands with great love and constant care. My late Elizabeth helped me choose the best varieties of roses. We spent hours together planning the best arrangement of the beds, dreaming of the happy time when our yet-to-be-born grandchildren would play merrily under these trees that we knew we would never see again. Do you know what the saddest thing about this situation is? Said I quietly, without turning back to them. I truly, sincerely believe that you genuinely cared about me, honestly and unselfishly care. We do care about you, Patrick began in an unsure voice, but I raised my hand firmly, emphatically interrupting his pathetic excuses. No, that's not true. You care solely about yourself, about your selfish plans, your personal comfort, your money, your cloudless future, and I am nothing but an annoying obstacle for you to get out of the way as soon as possible. Rachel swiftly rose from the couch and walked determinedly toward me. Stop playing the innocent martyr and victim of unjust circumstances. We are offering you a perfectly decent and reasonable solution. You will be much better off in a modern nursing home than in this empty house. There are people of your age there all the time, with whom you can communicate interestingly. There is excellent round-the-clock medical care. There are organized a variety of entertainment and useful leisure activities. There is absolutely everything there, except the main thing. Freedom, I calmly replied, continuing to stare out the darkening window. Freedom, she laughed with undisguised malicious sarcasm. What kind of freedom are you talking about? Freedom to slowly live out your life all alone in this huge empty house? Freedom to be constantly afraid that no one will find you if you suddenly fall and break your leg? The freedom to gradually turn into a decrepit, helpless old man? I slowly turned to face them. Patrick sat with his head guiltily lowered, his nervous hands restlessly rubbing the edge of his starched shirt. Rachel stood next to him with a defiant, even aggressive look, clearly ready to continue her relentless attack. They both stared at me stubbornly, as if I were an extremely unfortunate misunderstanding that had interfered too long and persistently with their cherished plans for a happy and carefree life. Tell me absolutely straight and utterly honestly, I said slowly and distinctly, looking intently at one and the other. Who am I really to you? Patrick raised his head sharply, a distinct flicker of confusion in his startled eyes. What exactly do you mean, Dad? Who am I really? Your loving father and close relative? A full-fledged family member whom you genuinely love and deeply respect? Or just an annoying old man who constantly interferes with your normal life and who you need to get rid of by any means necessary? Rachel snorted contemptuously. You want to hear honesty? Then get honesty without all the sugarcoating and diplomacy. You're nothing to us. Just a stubborn old man who clings hopelessly to a long-gone past and flatly refuses to recognize objective reality. The cruel word nobody hung heavy in the electrified air of the living room like a ringing slap. Patrick turned sharply toward his wife with genuine surprise, but she went on sternly, completely oblivious to his shocked reaction. Yes, that's right, with no reservations. You are absolutely nothing to us. A heavy burden and a constant nuisance. We've long ago grown tired of hopelessly pretending that we actually enjoy spending precious time with you. We are dead tired of patiently listening to your endless, boring, senile stories about the long-forgotten past. We're finally tired of constantly worrying about what might happen to you at any inopportune moment. Patrick opened his mouth slowly to say something in my defense, perhaps to try to soften his own wife's unbearably cruel words, but then just as slowly closed it again without saying anything. He deliberately did not defend his own father against his wife's mercilessly cruel words, nor did he object strongly to the fact that I had been openly called a nobody. His eloquent silence spoke far more than any of the most fiery words, and clearly indicated that deep down he completely agreed with every cruel word Rachel had said. I see, I said with absolute outward calm. I thank you sincerely for being so frank and forthright. I strode resolutely to the front door and opened it wide, letting in the fresh, cool evening air. I guess we really have nothing more to talk about. Goodbye. Rachel proudly headed for the exit, defiantly not looking at me, with her head held high and defiantly raised. Patrick rose slowly and uncertainly from his chair, his face dead pale with the acute realization of what had just happened and what the consequences might be. On the threshold, he stopped abruptly and turned around hesitantly. Dad, I wanted to... Goodbye, Patrick, I repeated firmly and definitively, not letting him finish and make his pathetic excuses. They left in silence, slamming the doors of their expensive automobile defiantly loudly. I stood at the big window for a long time and watched carefully as the bright red lights of their car gradually dissolved and disappeared completely into the thick darkness of the evening. My house around me seemed much quieter than usual, as if space itself had quieted down and stood still after this heavy scene. Even the familiar, monotonous ticking of the antique clock on the mantel was noticeably louder and more distinct. I slowly made my way into the spacious kitchen and poured myself a glass of cold spring water. My hands trembled faintly, but not from frustration, resentment, or heartache. It was purely from a firm inner determination and absolute clarity of thought. For many 40 years of hard work as a bailiff, I witnessed many family dramas and tragedies, many sad cases when the closest relatives turned into sworn enemies because of inheritance and material property. But never even in a terrible dream did I think that such a situation could affect me and my own family. That sleepless night I hardly slept at all. Lying in the wide bed I had once happily shared with my dearly beloved wife, I thought endlessly about Rachel's cruel words. You're nobody. That merciless phrase played obsessively in my head, like an old broken record that was impossible to stop. I recalled in detail how patiently I had raised Patrick practically alone after the tragically early death of his beloved wife, how I had worked hard in 2 heavy shifts to ensure him a decent education and a bright future, how sincerely proud I was of his first serious job, his beautiful wedding, his independent adult life. By early morning, the big decision had matured finally and irrevocably. At exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, I called the experienced notary James Foster, with whom I had worked fruitfully for many years, and whom I trusted completely and unconditionally in all legal matters. We quickly arranged an urgent appointment for 11 o'clock in the morning, and I felt a strange but pleasant relief that I had finally made this momentous decision. Foster's solid office was located in the historic center of Wellington, in a grand old dark red brick building with high arch windows and massive carved oak doors. I knew the way there by heart, as I had often come to this respectable building on various business occasions when I was still actively working. James met me right at the front door, smiling as always in a friendly manner and warmly shaking the hand of an old acquaintance. "Robert, what brings you here at this early hour? Has something really serious happened in your life?" "I urgently need to drastically change my will," I said without much preamble or detailed explanation. We walked into his spacious office, tastefully furnished with expensive antique furniture and densely packed with thick, leather-bound legal reference books. Foster was exactly my age. We had known each other for over 20 years and had worked together successfully on many complex cases. He tactfully didn't ask any unnecessary questions about the personal motivations behind such a drastic decision, just silently pulled my valid will out of the massive steel safe and listened attentively to all the new detailed instructions. "Are you absolutely sure of the correctness of this drastic decision?" he cautiously asked when I had completely finished laying out my categorical demands. "It is indeed a very serious decision that will change the whole situation dramatically and irreversibly. Perhaps you should think it over a little longer and weigh everything carefully." "I have been thinking about it all sleepless night," I replied with an iron hardness in my voice. "What's more, I've been thinking seriously about this possibility for months on end. Last night's unpleasant conversation has only finally confirmed the absolute correctness of my long-held thoughts." Foster nodded understandingly and sympathetically and immediately began typing the new legal document on his old but extremely reliable typewriter. After exactly an hour of painstaking work, the whole thing was complete and properly executed according to all the existing rules and laws. I carefully put my signature on each individual page. He carefully certified the entire document with his official seal and personal signature. Now my cozy house, all my life savings, and absolutely all other property by law passed not to ungrateful Patrick, as it was established before, but to my lovely niece Chloe. Coming home from the notary, I felt a strange lightness in my chest. It was as if the weight I had been carrying for many months had finally fallen from my shoulders. A copy of the new will was in my safe, and I knew I had made the right decision. But now the hardest part was telling Chloe. My niece lived in Christchurch, a 3-hour drive from Wellington. Chloe was the daughter of my late sister Mary, who had died of cancer 8 years before. After her mother died, the girl was left all alone. Her father had died in a car accident when she was 16. I helped with her education, paying for her to go to veterinary school, but I never considered it a special credit. Mary would have done the same for Patrick if an accident had befallen us. Chloe was now 31 years old. She worked as a veterinarian in a small clinic and lived modestly, but by choice. After graduation, she had been offered high-paying jobs in big city clinics, but she had chosen to stay in Christchurch, where she felt needed. Most of her patients were animals from shelters and pets of people with little money. We kept in touch over the years. Chloe called me every week to check on my health and to tell me about her work. For birthdays and holidays, she sent handwritten cards with warm words. Twice a year, she came to visit, and these visits were a real treat for me. Unlike Patrick and Rachel, she never showed any interest in my estate, never asked about a will, never hinted at an inheritance. I remembered her last visit 3 months ago. Chloe had come for the weekend, brought pictures of her patients, and passionately told stories of rescuing sick animals. She helped me in the garden, cooked dinner, and we talked about everything in the world until late into the night. When she left, she gave me a big hug and told me she missed our conversations. It was now 3:30 in the afternoon. This was the time Chloe usually took a break between patient appointments. I dialed her number, holding the receiver with slightly trembling fingers, not from excitement, but from anticipation of her reaction. "Uncle Robert!" Her voice sounded pleased and surprised. "How unexpected! How are you doing? Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine, dear," I replied, settling into the chair. "Just wanted to talk to you. I'm not interrupting?" "Of course not. I'm just on my lunch break. Tell me what's new with you. How's your health?" Her voice was so warm, so sincere. There was no strain, no underlying irritation that I heard in Patrick's voice all the time. Chloe was genuinely excited about my call, and you could feel it in every word. "Chloe, I have something important to tell you," I began cautiously. "I went to the notary today and changed my will." There was silence on the phone. Then Chloe asked cautiously, Is something wrong with your health? Are you sick? No, there's nothing wrong with my health. It's something else. I told her about my conversation with Patrick and Rachel yesterday, about them calling me a nobody, about their plans to send me to a nursing home. Chloe listened in silence, only occasionally sighing softly. Uncle, I'm so sorry, she said when I was done. I knew your relationship was strained, but I didn't realize it was this serious. You knew, I wondered. Well, the last time I came over, you were talking about their visits, and I got the impression you were upset. And you also mentioned once that Rachel is always talking about how expensive it is to maintain the house. It turned out that Chloe had noticed things I hadn't fully realized. My subconscious was already sensing falseness in my son and daughter-in-law's behavior, and it was showing up in my stories. So, I continued, I decided to rewrite the will in your favor. The house, the savings, all the property will now go to you. There was silence again. Then Chloe said quietly, Uncle Robert, I don't know what to say. I mean, it's a huge responsibility. And Patrick, he's your son. Patrick made it clear to me that I was nothing to him, I replied firmly. And you've been there for me all these years, calling, visiting, taking an interest in my affairs. Not because you were waiting for an inheritance, but because you really cared. Chloe was silent for a few seconds, pondering my words. Uncle, are you sure? Maybe we should try talking to Patrick again. People say stupid things in a fit of anger. This was Chloe's typical response. Always ready to give a second chance. Always looking for an opportunity for reconciliation. She got this quality from her mother, Mary too, always tried to help people find common ground. But in this case, reconciliation was impossible. No, dear, it's not anger, it's their true attitude toward me. Rachel planned to get rid of me from the beginning, and Patrick just succumbed to her influence. The decision is final. Chloe sighed. Good. If that's what you've decided, then there's a good reason for it. You've always been a wise and fair man. But Uncle, I want you to know, what matters most to me is that you are alive and well. The house, the money, those things are secondary. Tears came to my eyes. When was the last time someone said those words to me? When was the last time someone was genuinely concerned about my well-being and not my possessions? Thank you, Chloe. You have no idea how important it is for me to hear that. What's going to happen now? Have you told Patrick about your decision? Not yet, no, but they'll know soon enough. James Foster, my notary, will send them a notice that the will has been changed. It's standard procedure. Chloe hesitated. They'll be shocked, and probably very angry. Let them be angry, I interrupted her. They got what they deserved, and you got what you deserved. Uncle, can I come visit you this weekend? I think we need to talk in person, and I want to make sure you didn't make a hasty decision under the influence of emotion. The concern in her voice was so genuine, so natural. She wasn't worried about the size of the inheritance, but about whether I'd done the right thing. Not about her own interests, but about my state of mind. Of course, come and see me. I'll be glad to see you. But my decision won't change. I've been thinking about it for a long time, and yesterday's conversation only confirmed the correctness of my thoughts. All right, I'll take Friday off and come over Thursday night. Spend the long weekend with you. After talking to Chloe, I felt incredibly relieved. It was like a heavy stone had fallen from my soul. I had done what I thought was right, and the person who would suffer the most from that decision had handled it with understanding and wisdom. I spent the rest of the day in the garden doing fall pruning of roses. The physical work helped put my thoughts in order. I thought about how my life would turn out next. Patrick and Rachel would probably try to pressure me to change my will back. They would threaten, beg, maybe even try to have me declared insane. But I was prepared for that. Years of dealing with conflicted people had taught me to hold my punches and not give in to provocation. I had witnesses to yesterday's conversation, Patrick and Rachel themselves. Their words about me being a nobody and a burden were the decisive argument in favor of changing the will. In the evening, I called James Foster and asked him to send out the notices as soon as possible. I wanted to get it over with as quickly as possible without giving myself time to doubt. The notice from Notary Foster reached Patrick as early as Wednesday morning. I knew this because my phone rang at 9:30 while I was having my morning coffee in the kitchen. The number was a familiar one, but I didn't rush to answer it. Let it ring all the way through, then again. On the third time, though, I picked up the phone. Dad! Patrick's voice sounded excited. What's the meaning of this? I got a letter from your notary. Good morning, Patrick, I replied calmly, sipping my coffee. What letter are you talking about? Don't pretend you know what I mean. It says here that you changed your will. Is that true? I set my cup on the table and leaned back in my chair. True. There was silence on the phone. Then I heard Patrick relay the information to Rachel. Her outraged scream could be heard even through the phone. Daddy, you can't do this. Patrick returned to the conversation. This is insane. Your son, I'm your only heir. Was, I corrected him. Now my heir is Chloe. Chloe. He didn't immediately realize who he was talking about. Aunt Mary's daughter? But why? For what? For never calling me anything, I answered. For not thinking me a burden. For caring about my well-being, not the size of my bank account. Silence again. Patrick pondered my words, trying to find counter-arguments. Rachel's voice could be heard in the background, saying something quickly, clearly giving her husband instructions. Dad, let's meet and talk calmly, Patrick finally said. Maybe we misunderstood something on Sunday. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. There was no misunderstanding. You said exactly what you thought you said. But you can't disinherit your own son over one quarrel. It's not one quarrel, Patrick. It's the result of your actions over the last few months. You wanted to get rid of me. Now I'm getting rid of you. I hung up without waiting for an answer. The phone immediately rang again, but I didn't answer it. Then it rang again, and again. Finally, I unplugged it. The rest of the morning passed quietly. I read the paper, did chores, cooked dinner. At 1, a familiar car pulled up to the house. Patrick and Rachel arrived unannounced, as one would expect. They didn't ring the doorbell, but started pounding on the door with their fists. Robert, open up right now. We know you're home, yelled Rachel. I went to the door, but was in no hurry to open it. What do you want? We need to talk. Patrick knocked even louder. Dad, open up, please. I opened the door. They burst into the house without even saying hello. Rachel was pale with rage. Patrick looked confused and scared. In his hands was a folder of papers, apparently a letter from a notary and copies of some papers. How could you? Rachel descended on me with reproach, barely crossing the threshold. How could you do this to us? We're your family. You said yourself that I'm nothing to you, I replied calmly. Why would anyone leave an inheritance to a family? Patrick tried to take the initiative. Dad, please sit down. Let's discuss this calmly. We walked to the living room. I sat down in my chair. They settled on the couch across from me. Rachel clenched her hands into fists, clearly trying to hold back. Patrick spread papers out on the coffee table. Here's a letter from the notary, he began, trying to speak in a steady voice. It says here that you've completely changed your will. The entire estate goes to Chloe Wilson. Is that true? True. But why? He looked at me puzzled. Chloe doesn't even live here. She comes to visit you at most twice a year. But when she comes, she acts like a family person, I replied, not like a property appraiser. Rachel couldn't take it anymore. Enough of this nonsense. Your niece doesn't even need an inheritance. She has a job, she has her own life, and we planned our lives counting on this house. You were counting on my death, I said bluntly, planned on getting rid of me so you could get the inheritance. Patrick blushed. That's not true. We wanted you to be safe and comfortable. In a nursing home. Well, yes, there's medical staff there. There's no freedom there, I interrupted him. More importantly, I'll die faster there, and you'll get what you want faster. Rachel got up from the couch and started pacing the room. This is absurd. We were taking care of you. You cared about yourselves, about your plans, about your comfort. What's wrong with wanting to live well? She turned to me. We're young. We have the right to make plans for the future. And you don't have long to live anyway. Rachel, tried Patrick to stop her, but it was too late. What Rachel? I'm telling the truth. He's 72 years old. How much longer will he last? 5 years? 10? And we have to wait all this time for him to deign to make way for us? I listened calmly to her tirade. Every word only confirmed that I had made the right decision. Rachel was saying exactly what she thought. To her, I was just an obstacle that had taken too long to get out of the way. Now you won't have to wait, I said when she was done. The road is clear. Live as you wish. Make your plans. Just without my involvement. Patrick got up from the couch and walked over to me. Dad, I understand you're upset with us. Maybe we said something wrong on Sunday, but we can fix it, right? We can, I agreed. Just don't. What do you mean you don't have to? He squatted on the arm of my chair. I'm your son, your only son. You can't disinherit me. I can. I already have. Rachel approached from the other side. Now she changed tactics and tried to speak softly, almost affectionately. Robert, you're a reasonable man. Think to yourself, is it fair to give everything to Chloe? She doesn't even know your house, doesn't know how much effort you've put into it. And Patrick grew up here. This is his home. If he considered it home, he wouldn't have suggested I leave it, I replied. We were offering a reasonable solution, she insisted. Sell the house and buy a smaller apartment, or move to a nursing home with good facilities. We were thinking of your welfare. You were thinking about the money from selling the house. Patrick took my hand. Dad, please. Let's forget everything that was said on Sunday. We were tired, nervous. People say stupid things when they're angry. I looked at him carefully. There was despair in his eyes. Not the pain of losing his father, but the fear of losing his inheritance. Even now, trying to reconcile, he wasn't thinking about our relationship, but about money. Tell me honestly, Patrick, I asked. If I had no assets, if I lived on one pension in a rented apartment, would you visit me as often? Would you be as concerned for my well-being? He was confused. Well, of course I would be worried. Not true, I said firmly. If I had nothing to leave you, you would have forgotten I existed a month after Elizabeth's funeral. Rachel couldn't hold back any longer. Enough of this demagoguery. Do you want to punish us for telling the truth? For not pretending and saying pretty words? No, I answered calmly. I'm rewarding you for being honest. You said I was nobody to you. Now no one owes anyone anything. After my words, a heavy silence hung in the living room. Patrick was still sitting on the armrest of my chair, his hand resting on my shoulder. Rachel was standing next to me, and I could see the sparks of fury in her eyes. She was no longer trying to play the role of the caring daughter-in-law. The mask was finally falling off. Okay, Patrick said slowly. Let's say we were really wrong on Sunday. Suppose we said something unnecessary. But it can be fixed, right? I'm willing to apologize. We're willing to change our behavior. I looked at him in surprise. You're willing to apologize for thinking I'm a nobody? I don't think you're a nobody. He spoke faster, feeling the ground leaving under his feet. Rachel was the one who said that, and I just didn't know what to say back. Rachel turned sharply to her husband. What do you mean it was Rachel who said so? You're the one who said he was disturbing our lives. I said we were worried about him. Patrick tried to justify himself. They're different things. No, not different, his wife interrupted him. You were saying exactly what you thought, and now you're trying to put all the blame on me. I watched their altercation with interest. The stress was forcing them to show their true colors. Patrick, as always, was trying to avoid responsibility, to blame it on others. Rachel was angry that her husband didn't support her in her time of need. They were fighting over an inheritance that no longer belonged to them. That's enough, I said, rising from my chair. Don't fight over me. You have time now to work things out among yourselves without the distraction of worrying about your old father. Patrick jumped up and blocked my way. Dad, wait, we can work this out. I understand you're upset, but let's think rationally. Rationally? I interjected. Okay, rationally speaking, you waited 5 years for me to die so you could get the inheritance. Rationally speaking, you tried to get rid of me by sending me to a nursing home. Rationally speaking, I made the only decision that was right for me. Rachel stepped closer. Now she tried a different tactic, emotional blackmail. Robert, think of Patrick. He's your son, your only son. Do you really want to ruin his life? His life isn't ruined. He has a job, a wife, his own plans. He'll get along just fine without my inheritance. But we were counting on this house. Tears came into her voice. We planned our lives. We have dreams. Your dreams were based on my death, I replied stiffly. Build new dreams based on your own abilities. Patrick grabbed my hand. Dad, please, please, I'm willing to do anything. Ready to apologize, ready to change my behavior. We'll come to see you every day. We'll take care of you. Every day, I grinned. Until I die? And how long will that last? A month? 2? And then you'll start talking again about how hard it is for you to take care of a sick old man. No, I promise I won't. Your promises are worthless, Patrick. You already promised to love and respect me when I raised you. Where is that love and respect now? Rachel sat down on the couch and sobbed, loudly, defiantly, so that everyone could see her distress. It's not fair. We're young. We're entitled to happiness, and you are depriving us of our future. Your future should not depend on my inheritance, I said calmly. If it does, then you haven't planned your life well. Patrick walked over to his wife and tried to calm her down, but she pushed him away. Don't touch me. This is all because of your weakness. If you were a real man, you would have found a way to convince your father. What way? He asked confusedly. Any way. You could have gone to the doctors, proved that he was insane. You could challenge the will in court. I listened intently to their conversation. Rachel was saying out loud what they must have been thinking on the way here. A plan of coercion, a plan to fight for the inheritance by any means necessary. Even trying to declare me crazy was considered an option. Interesting, I said aloud. So you've already considered how to challenge my decision? Patrick blushed. No, we haven't. Considered, Rachel interrupted him, rising from the couch. And you know what? We're going to do it. We'll find a way to prove that you were misled or that you weren't in your right mind. Rachel, shut up! Her husband tried to stop her. I won't shut up. Stop beating around the bush. Robert, you think you're so smart you outsmarted us? And we'll prove that your niece pressured you, that she forced you to change your will, I laughed. Chloe didn't even know the will existed until yesterday. How could she have pressured me? We'll find a way to prove it, Rachel repeated stubbornly. There are witnesses to our good relations with you. There is evidence that we cared for you. What proof? I inquired. We came to see you every week. We took an interest in your health. We offered help. You came once a week for 2 hours and spent most of the time talking about how I needed to get rid of the house. I corrected her. That's not caring. That's pressure. Rachel stepped up close to me, her face contorted with rage, her eyes burning with anger. You know what I'm going to tell you? You're a pathetic old man who's taking revenge on his family because no one wants you. No one loves you because you're mean and selfish. Rachel, Patrick grabbed his wife's arm, trying to pull her away from me. But she lashed out and kept yelling. What the Rachel? Let him know the truth. We've put up with him forever. His boring stories about the past, his claims, his whims. We pretended to enjoy his company, when in fact every visit here was torture to us. There it is, the true face. No mask, no pretense. Rachel was saying what she'd been thinking all these years. Every visit was torture for them. Every conversation with me was a necessity. They had tolerated me for the sake of the inheritance. And now that the inheritance had slipped away, there was no point in tolerating anymore. Go on, I said calmly. It's very interesting to listen to. You are interested, she laughed hysterically. Then listen, we hate this house. We hate your roses, your pictures, your memories. We abhor your advice and your moralizing. You think you're so wise, but really you're just an old bore. Patrick tried to put his hand over his wife's mouth, but she bit him and continued. And you know what the funny thing is? Your precious Chloe puts up with you out of politeness too. Do you think she enjoys listening to you complain about life? Do you think she genuinely enjoys your phone calls? Enough! Patrick grabbed Rachel by the shoulders and started shaking her. You've completely lost your mind. Crazy, she wrenched out of his arms. And who 2 hours ago said you'd do anything for your father's inheritance? Who suggested we go to psychiatrists and prove him insane? Patrick turned pale. That's not what I meant. That's exactly what I meant. You're willing to declare your own father insane for money. And now you're playing noble. I listened to their quarrel with growing interest. The stress was forcing them to tell the truth, to show their real motives. Patrick was really considering declaring me insane. Rachel really hated every minute of interaction with me. They both dreamed of my death and made plans for my inheritance. You know what? I said when their shouting subsided. I'm grateful for your honesty. Now I'm finally convinced I made the right decision. Rachel turned to me with crazy eyes. The rightness of the decision? You ruined our lives. We put up with your whims for 5 years, played the role of loving relatives for 5 years. And in gratitude, you have robbed us of what is rightfully ours. By what right? Asked I. By the right of a son, interposed Patrick. I am your only child. Who, if not I, should receive the inheritance? He who deserves it, I answered simply. And you've shown that you don't deserve it. Rachel suddenly calmed down, dangerously calm. Okay, she said quietly. If that's the case, then we declare war on you. We'll fight for the inheritance by any means necessary. We'll find witnesses, we'll find doctors, we'll find lawyers. We'll prove that the will is invalid. Try it, I said indifferently. I have witnesses to your words about me being nobody to you. I have records of your attempts to force me to sell the house. Good luck in court. Patrick and Rachel looked over at me. They realized that I was ready for their attacks, that I had my trump cards against them, but they weren't going to back down. A week had passed since Patrick and Rachel's last visit. I'd been living quietly, enjoying the silence and lack of tension that their visits invariably brought. Chloe arrived on Thursday night, as promised, and we spent a lovely weekend talking about everything in the world. She was surprised by my decision but didn't judge it, understanding the motives that had led me to it. Monday morning, I received a call from James Foster. He said that he had sent formal notices to all concerned, including information about who was now the heir. He was required by law to notify the old heirs of the change as well. Robert, prepare for a storm, he warned me. When people find out about changes like this, they usually don't stay calm. He turned out to be right. By lunchtime, my phone hadn't stopped ringing. Patrick called every half hour, but I didn't answer. Around 3 in the afternoon, their car pulled up to the house. I watched from the window as they sat in the car, arguing heatedly about something. Rachel was waving her arms around. Patrick was writing something down in his notebook. They didn't knock on the door. Instead, Patrick pulled out his cell phone and tried to call me again. When I didn't answer, they left, but returned an hour later with some papers in their hands. This time, they did come to the door. "Dad, we know you're home," yelled Patrick. "We need to talk. It's very important." I didn't answer. After a few minutes, they left, but I realized that this was just the beginning. People don't give up easily when there's a lot of money involved, and the value of my house and savings amounted to a solid sum. That evening, Chloe called me from Christchurch. Her voice sounded excited. "Uncle Robert," Patrick called me, she said at once without preamble. He asked for my address and said he wanted to come and talk to me in person. What did you say to him? Nothing. Said I'd talk to you first. He was very persistent, almost aggressive. Said there was a misunderstanding between you two that could be resolved. I wasn't surprised. Of course they'd try to influence Chloe. They'd probably have a whole persuasion strategy ready. They'll tell her how forgetful and inadequate I've become, how easily misled I am, how important it is to get justice. Chloe, if they do find a way to contact you, remember one thing. My decision is considered and final. No one forced me, no one pressured me. I simply made a choice in favor of a man who treats me as a living being, not an obstacle. I understand, Uncle, and I will remember your words. The next day, Patrick and Rachel arrived at my house again. This time, they had with them a woman I didn't recognize in a business suit. A lawyer, I thought. They had already hired a lawyer. They pounded on the door for almost half an hour, shouting threats and promises. They said they would prove my insanity, that they would find witnesses to my inappropriate behavior, that they would go to court to invalidate the will. "Dad, you're destroying the family," yelled Patrick. "Think about what Mom would say." The mention of Elizabeth hurt me the most. My wife had always dreamed of grandchildren, of a big, close-knit family. But she taught me the difference between true love and self-interest, and now she would probably support my decision. A few days later, Chloe called again. This time her voice trembled with indignation. "Uncle, they found my address and came to my workplace, made a scene right in the clinic, in front of patients and coworkers. Rachel yelled that I was destroying the family, that I was using your old age for my own purposes. What did you tell them?" "Told them that if they ever showed up at my work or home again, I would go to the police." Patrick tried to speak calmly, but Rachel was just out of control. She accused me of planning for years to take over the inheritance, of turning you against them on purpose. I clenched my fists. They dared to bother Chloe at her job, to humiliate her in front of her coworkers. This was too much. Chloe, I'll call Foster and have him send them a formal warning. Let them know that any attempts to pressure you will have legal consequences. Thank you, Uncle, but I'm not afraid of them. I was just taken aback by their insolence, especially Rachel's. She said things like that, calling you an old fool who's easily fooled. A week later, things got even more heated. Patrick and Rachel hired a private investigator who began to follow Chloe, finding out the details of her life. They tried to find dirt, something that could be used against her in court. At the same time, they spread rumors among my few acquaintances, saying that I had lost my mind, that I was being deceived by my devious niece. Fortunately, the people who knew me well did not believe these tales. James Foster kept me regularly informed of their actions. They consulted with various lawyers trying to find a way to contest the will, but the document was impeccably drafted, and I was in good health and of sound mind at the time it was signed. Robert, they made another attempt, Foster informed me during one of our conversations. Requested a doctor to conduct a mental examination of you. They claim you've become forgetful and inadequate. And what was the doctor's response? Dr. Miller refused, said he saw you a month ago for a routine examination, and you were perfectly normal. What's more, he's willing to give an opinion that you're in excellent mental condition. Their attempts became increasingly desperate. Rachel even tried to bribe my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, to testify about my strange behavior. The older woman told me of this offer with indignation. Robert, that woman offered me money for lying about you, she resented. Said if I told about your alleged oddities, she would pay me $500. A month later, their activity went downhill. The lawyers explained to them that their chances of success in court were minimal. The will was properly drafted, there were witnesses to my sanity, and their own behavior during the last visit only confirmed the validity of my decision. Patrick made one last attempt. He came alone without Rachel and stood at my gate for a long time. I could see him from the window. He looked older, gaunt. He raised his hand several times to knock, but never did. Eventually, he just left, and I never saw him again. The family relationship was completely and utterly ruined. It had been 4 months since I'd last seen Patrick at my gate. 4 long months of peace and quiet that I hadn't known in years. My house had become a real home again, a place where I could relax and live the life I wanted to live, without looking at other people's expectations or listening to the constant insinuations that I was unnecessary and burdensome. This year's fall was especially beautiful and generous. The trees in my garden were painted in gold and purple colors, creating a picturesque picture outside the living room window. I spent a lot of time outdoors tending my roses, preparing them for the coming winter. Each morning invariably began with a leisurely stroll through the garden, where I carefully checked the condition of all the plants and planned the next day's work. Life gradually settled into a measured, pleasant rhythm. I got up every day at 7 in the morning, leisurely prepared my breakfast, and read the morning newspaper without hurrying anywhere. No one called with complaints and dissatisfaction. No one came with insistent demands to change my established way of life. It was the very freedom that Rachel had so scornfully and viciously mocked during our last conversation. Chloe continued to call me every week, just as promised. Our conversations became even more warm, trusting and sincere. She told me in detail about her work at the veterinary clinic, about the patients she managed to save, about her plans for the near and distant future. There was not the slightest shadow of self-interest or cold calculation in her voice. She continued to treat me exactly as she had before, as if no inheritance existed in nature at all. Uncle Robert, how is your health? She was sure to ask during each of our weekly telephone conversations. Fine, I always answered with complete sincerity, even better than it was a few months ago. Turns out that constant stress is really taking a toll on my overall health. I'm very glad to hear that. How are things going with the garden? Are you having any luck getting the roses ready for the coming winter? We could talk for hours about the ordinary, everyday things that make up real life, about the changeable weather, about the books we read, about the latest news in the country and the world, about the things that are really interesting and important in normal human life. Neither of us ever mentioned money, the house, the controversial will. These were natural conversations between really close people who genuinely valued each other's company. Chloe started coming to see me about once a month. She always warned about the visit in advance and always brought something nice and useful. Fresh fruit from her own small garden, homemade jam made according to her late mother's recipes, interesting books that I might like. We spent the long weekends completely relaxed, without the slightest fuss or tension. During one of these regular visits, she told me in detail about Patrick's last desperate attempt to contact her. He sent a very long letter to my work, she said calmly, slowly stirring her tea in a china cup with a spoon. Several pages in laborious handwriting. He wrote at length about how deeply he regretted the misunderstanding, how he sincerely wished to restore his former warm relations with you. "And what did you answer him?" inquired I. "Absolutely nothing. I knew at once that it was just another cunning attempt to get at the inheritance by any means. If he was really sorry for what happened, he would have come here in person and apologized directly to you, instead of trying to influence me." A wise and perceptive girl. She saw through people perfectly, did not fall for beautiful, empty words and false promises. That's why I made the absolutely right choice, changing the will in her favor. The immediate neighbors gradually got used to the fact that Patrick and Rachel no longer appeared at my house on weekends. Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman who lived next door and, out of old habit, kept a close eye on all the neighborhood news, asked me directly about it one day. "Robert, does your son no longer come to visit you? I used to see their car regularly every weekend." "No, he doesn't come anymore," I answered completely calmly. "We've had a fundamental difference of opinion on some fundamental things." She nodded her head understandingly. At her advanced age, she must have been well aware of many such family stories where parents and adult children could not find common ground and parted peacefully. She tactfully avoided asking me about the unpleasant details, for which I was truly grateful. Dr. Miller, my regular primary care physician, had noticed and noted during my last routine checkup that my blood pressure had stabilized noticeably and my overall physical condition was much improved from the previous months. "What exactly has changed in your daily life, Robert?" he asked with professional interest as he carefully recorded the medical readings in my chart. "You've been looking much better and younger for the past few months. Completely removed a major source of constant nervous stress from my life," I answered honestly, not wanting to go into painful family details. The experienced doctor smiled understandingly. "Sometimes it really is the right and wisest decision you can make in life." He was absolutely right. Free of Patrick and Rachel's weekly exhausting visits, I really did feel a whole 10 years younger. The unpleasant heaviness in my chest that invariably set in every weekend in anxious anticipation of their arrival was completely gone. The constant strain of having to listen patiently to veiled hints and open complaints was completely gone. James Foster continued to call me occasionally to inform me of Patrick and Rachel's renewed attempts to find some legal loopholes in my will. But these desperate attempts were becoming increasingly rare and clearly hopeless. "They've finally realized that exactly nothing can be changed," he informed me during our last phone conversation. "Their own lawyer finally honestly explained to them that the will was legally flawless." And how did they take the unpleasant news? Patrick appears to have finally come to terms with reality. Rachel, on the other hand, she's now blaming everything on her husband. She openly tells her acquaintances that if he had been a truly devoted son, he would have found an effective way to return the inheritance to the family. Their once strong marriage had taken a serious crack. It was utterly inevitable. When the common cherished goal for which people are willing to tolerate each other finally disappears, relationships inevitably collapse. Rachel had married Patrick not out of great love, but out of cold practical calculation. Now that the careful calculation was not justified, there was no reason for her to continue to maintain the tedious appearance of marital happiness. In the winter, I received some very unexpected news from my curious neighbor, Mrs. Thompson. She had met Rachel by chance in a large store and learned firsthand that she had officially filed divorce papers. She looked very angry and disappointed, the elderly neighbor detailed, was loudly telling anyone who was willing to listen that Patrick had completely disappointed her as a man, that she had wasted the best years of her life on him, the best years of her life. Only 5 years of marriage she proudly called the best years. Curious exactly how many of those supposedly best years she spent secretly dreaming of my imminent death and planning in detail exactly how she would spend her long-awaited inheritance. Patrick was left all alone as a result. Sometimes, in rare moments of weakness, I felt genuinely sorry for him, But then I inevitably remembered his cruel words that I was seriously interfering with their normal life, and pity instantly passed without a trace. He had consciously made his final choice, deciding to side with his greedy wife against his own father. Now let him live quietly with the severe consequences of this rash choice. In early spring, Chloe told me really important and joyful news. She had met a wonderful man, an experienced veterinarian from a neighboring town, and they were seriously planning to get officially married. Uncle Robert, I really want you to make sure you meet him in person, she said excitedly over the phone. His name is Daniel Harris, and he is a wonderful and very kind man. We are already planning a beautiful wedding for this coming summer. I was quite genuinely happy for her. Chloe definitely deserved real human happiness, and if this man I didn't know really made her truly happy, then he was well worthy of her love and devotion. Of course, my dear. Be sure to bring him for a visit the first chance you get. Let's get to know him better. Daniel turned out to be an exceptionally pleasant, well-mannered young man who loved Chloe sincerely and deeply. He didn't show even the slightest unhealthy interest in my considerable possessions and spoke to me as an equal to an equal, respectfully, but without subservience. I liked him at once. Chloe has told me very much and warmly about you, he said during the first family dinner, about how you unselfishly helped her get a quality education, how you constantly supported her through some of life's most difficult moments. She really is a very good and decent person, I replied simply. Such wonderful people always want to be genuinely helped. Their wedding took place in a small, cozy church in Christchurch. I happened to be Chloe's only blood relative at the ceremony, and I was inexpressibly pleased and honored to walk her down the aisle. She looked simply beautiful in an elegant, simple white dress, her happy eyes literally glowing with joy and love. Thank you for everything, dear uncle, she whispered softly as we slowly made our way to the altar. For absolutely everything. I couldn't hold back the tears of emotion that came. At last, something truly joyful, light and pure had happened in our long-suffering family. A real wedding without the slightest calculation, without a shadow of self-interest, based solely on sincere mutual love. As I write these final lines leisurely, a whole year has already passed since the memorable moment of the radical change of the will. Chloe and Daniel are living in perfect harmony and happiness, visiting me regularly and with pleasure. Patrick never showed up, never even tried in any way to mend the finally broken relationship. Rachel, according to reliable rumors, left our town for good as soon as the divorce was finalized. In the end, everyone got exactly what they justly deserved by their actions. Chloe received sincere love and an unexpected inheritance, which she never asked for or even dreamed of. Patrick naturally received complete loneliness as a direct result of his conscious choice. Rachel got the bitter disappointment of completely unfulfilled self-serving plans, and I finally got the long-awaited peace of mind and the opportunity to live my life as I see fit and right.